And over this period where we've seen a decrease in jobs, we've seen a record increase in taxes that employers in the city of Seattle are paying, that employers aren't paying in Bellevue and other cities in our region. We have become an outlier when it comes to the cost of doing business in our city.
That's Downtown Seattle Association CEO John Scholes breaking down some of the challenges he is seeing in Seattle's downtown core, especially with lack of job growth. Are local leaders listening? Also, some new details on Mayor Katie Wilson's plan to bring more homeless people inside. Now the big challenge, where do these new housing units really go? And is that rumor of seeing the Sonics back in Seattle really true? No, you're not dreaming, gentle listener. You're tuned in to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on the Seattle channel. All the views expressed here are mine, and I'm with my friend and co-host David Croman, City Hall reporter for the Seattle Times. David, I saw this new campaign from the State Department of Ecology. It features a little marmot puppet kind of urging people to keep our state litter-free. So I was thinking if fines for people, and I'm talking it's up to $200 on a highway for littering. If that's not working, is a marmot puppet the answer? What are your thoughts?
That's funny. The fun trivia is that the "Don't Mess with Texas" slogan came from their anti-littering campaign,
Okay.
and that one has sort of been immortalized in time. I'm not sure that the marmot quite holds up the power of "Don't Mess with Texas."
Yeah, not quite the same, is it? It's one of those things where I feel like the marmot puppet is the right answer to something. We just haven't asked the right question yet.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, David, as always, for joining us. Thanks to all of our patrons. Linda, really appreciate your constant interaction and support of the show. Hoping to bring some more Seattle news junkies on board here. If you're a patron, you get Patrons First podcast. You even get a snazzy decal for your water bottle. Find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Thanks also for watching this podcast on Converge Media. The video version of the show is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. And some appreciation to our show sponsor, Phillips Law Firm. Auto accident, you need more than an attorney. You need someone who knows your community. Phillips Law Firm's attorneys are your neighbors here to help. Call 1-800-JUSTICE or visit justiceforyou.com. Phillips Law Firm, unleashing justice for you. All right, let's go. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, folks, plenty happening with the Seattle City Council this week. Some increased privacy protections, also those restrictions on federal authorities using city property for staging purposes, issues we've talked about on the podcast, the full council officially approving those this week. But David, I always like looking ahead with you. I wanted to take a look at what John Scholes of the DSA was saying in his recent State of Downtown address. He was pointing to job loss in downtown Seattle, 37,000 jobs lost over the last 5 years, while Bellevue job growth has been around 12%. He's really challenging city and local leaders over this issue, especially when it comes to taxes. And even Katie Wilson herself said at this meeting, it is not ideal for our business taxes to be out of step with our neighbors. She says, I'm looking at this, looking at some cuts. I wanted your reaction to what Scholes was saying, and maybe Mayor Wilson too.
Yeah, I mean, it's not surprising from Scholes. It's a line that we've heard from him for a long time. It does feel like there is more acknowledgement from folks like Katie Wilson from internally in the city that and she wasn't shy about this on the campaign trail, that
right.
There is sometimes a cause and effect when you're talking about taxation.
Mm-hmm.
I think some people would be surprised at the extent to which the mayor is, speaking to DSA and striking what sounds like a pretty moderate tone, particularly around taxes, because, the question of whether or not to tax rich people to fund social housing, I'm putting it a little crassly, but is kind of what animated her run for mayor in the first place. It's, she was outside of any elected officials in City Hall, was probably the number one factor in passing the Jumpstart tax as an advocate.
Yeah.
So this is somebody whose kind of political career has been based around progressive taxation, particularly some of the ones that she's talking about here.
Okay.
I think we will still see proposals from her around progressive taxation. I still anticipate we would see something around a local capital gains tax. But this is a mayor that, at least in her first 2.5 months, has really, I think, surprised the business community, DSA in particular, with some of the cautious rhetoric that she's struck around the future of business in Seattle and taxation. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But certainly certainly a message that, as my colleague Paul Roberts described, got sustained applause at
Yeah,
the State of Downtown. Um, and one that I think for some of her kind of most strident backers on the campaign trail is frankly a little concerning that
yeah,
this is where she has made some of her most substantive public remarks is to the business organization of downtown.
yeah.
Whereas, I've heard from some, this is the same week that some of the people who organized on her campaign wrote a petition telling her to roll back surveillance cameras. So you
That's
have this
right.
situation
That's
where
right.
she's saying sort of conciliatory and friendly things to the downtown business community, while some of the kind of more progressive organizers who helped get her elected are feeling like they need to write petitions. Of course, those
Hmm.
two issues aren't exactly related, but
I know
I
what you
do
mean.
think
Yeah.
it is kind of informs some of the political tenor around her mayorship so far.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of tax news that's been flying around this past week. Aside from what was going on with the DSA state of downtown, the state legislature passed a historic income tax on high earners, the so-called millionaires tax. We saw Howard Schultz move out of town. A lot of people were upset about that. I just wanted to try to figure out where we were on a larger scale here. Are elected leaders getting close to a reckoning with businesses over taxes? Are they growing farther apart on this issue? I know I'm asking a big question, but where do you see the momentum going right now, David?
Yeah, I mean, I would say before the session and before this year, the momentum was clearly in favor of taxing businesses, at least the political momentum. Again, we talked about this, but I would say the most the thing that sort of um, catalyzed this more than anything was Brian Haywood, the conservative
Yeah,
financier of initiatives, because he put this question of a capital gains tax on a statewide ballot, and which was going to repeal this capital gains tax, and it failed resoundingly in 32 out of 39 counties. That more than anything that any progressive organizer could have possibly done,
yeah,
sent a signal to a lot of Democrats in Washington that this is a winning issue, that
yeah,
they can plow ahead with this and feel fine politically. Um, there's a lot of noise around the new taxes that have come into play, and there's some high profile anecdotes. Of course, Howard Schultz
right.
announcing he's leaving. I don't know that we're going to really see the real world effects of this for a little while. We'll have another election in 2026, but that, is going to be a national election. People are going to be fired up for that. So, I think it's going to take a little while to shake out exactly the ramifications of the new taxes. But I would say up until now, I would say the political momentum was very much in favor of new taxes. It sounds like it may be a swinging back, at least as far as the messages that we're hearing from people
Yeah,
like Katie Wilson,
yeah.
maybe swinging back a little bit in the other direction. But we'll see.
Yeah, I know it's going to be interesting with the election too. We've got a whole bunch new four state Supreme Court seats are up there, and that's going to be a big part of what happens next with the state income tax here on millionaires. So we'll see what happens there. Thanks a lot for that, David. I like going down that path with you. I wanted to talk about some other interesting city news this week. You reported on this in the Times, David. Mayor Wilson has hit the pause button on allowing city employees to use AI tools like Copilot, for example. This was a rollout that was supposed to happen in late February. It was basically planned before she took office. What's going on here?
Yeah, the city has been sort of slowly rolling out a broad AI framework that includes a lot of things. It's really by necessity because AI is coming and has come whether we like it or not. One piece of that was this pilot program to essentially give city employees a sanctioned AI helper. So kind of like ChatGPT, but it's Microsoft Copilot. Um, the thought at the time was, I mean, there was the efficiency question, how much more could city employees do with this? But there, I think really motivating it was the fact that a lot of city employees were already using ChatGPT and doing so in a way that might put some private and sensitive information at risk, and certainly would kind of make public, like perhaps conflict with public disclosure laws.
Hmm.
So the thought from the Herald administration was, well, let's give a sanctioned tool that we can regulate and keep our eye on, and that was Copilot. So they started this pilot program of 500 employees last year. It was pretty well received. Employees reported saving about 2.5 hours a week by using it. So they
Hmm.
set this date for rolling it out citywide. Um, Mayor Wilson came in. Her office is not ruling out that this is going to proceed. In fact, my sense is it probably will
Hmm.
eventually. But they were hearing some, particularly from unions, who
Yeah.
were saying, hey, we should maybe vet this a little bit more. I think they weren't saying it in these terms exactly, but I think there is some concern about employment and jobs. Responding to that, Wilson decided, hey, I'm going to push pause on this until I better understand exactly the parameters that we've put around this program.
Like the idea potentially AI would replace city workers somehow, or what's the thought there? What's the concern from labor?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, we're talking about this one co-pilot program, but there is a lot more around AI happening here. They're looking at it for traffic analysis or kind of analyzing legislation, but there's other sort of practical elements of permitting that a lot of which is done by people right now. Um, and so I don't know if it's specific to this co-pilot program, but I think there are some broad general concerns from the unions that AI will start to replace workers. The policies that the city has now says over and over and over again, our goal is not to replace people. But, if you're talking about efficiencies and particularly something around permitting, which is, so frustratingly slow, I think a lot of people would like to see that sped up, which it's hard to see how you speed something like that up without cutting out employees
Yeah.
eventually. And so, yes, I think the unions have some broad concerns around this. Um, Again, I think it's inevitable. It's just more of a question of when and how rather than if. But the Wilson administration at least is giving them the space to air those concerns before they make any more steps.
God, and just a last touch on this briefly. I think there are some workers who are probably still using some AI tools right now, or are they banned from doing that, or what's the policy on this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for now, it's not sanctioned. It's not allowed. Again, there's probably workers still using
Yeah,
AI. That's a good question. I don't actually know what happened with those 500 employees who are in the pilot. And my sense is that pilot is over.
yeah.
So I'm not actually sure about that. It's a good
All right,
question.
fair question. There's always something to follow up on. Thank you for that, David. Up next, we are taking a closer look at Mayor Katie Wilson's plan to bring 1,000 people who were homeless inside this year. She's talking about 500 in just the next couple of months, but where exactly? Some details next on Now Hear This. More details this week on Mayor Wilson's plan to get 1,000 homeless people inside in the first year of her term. Her big goal, 500 by June 1st, just a couple of months away. The early wins could come from expanding the size of some existing tiny home villages from 100 to 150. We touched on that last week, even as high as 250 possibly in one location. But how exactly is that going to work with neighbors? That's one question that was raised by Councilmember Bob Kettle this week. He cautioned against moving too fast with this program, such that it might make it more difficult in the future, harkening back to a tiny home village project in the Salmon Bay area near Interbay just a few years ago.
Those pieces are really important because if that went south in terms of relationship with the neighborhoods, Magnolia and Queen Anne specifically, but also Interbay, just makes their job that much harder.
Because if that went south in terms of the relationship, it would just make your job overall a lot harder. Um, Here I go. 5, 4, 3, 2. David, so the council got a briefing on this from the mayor's office this week. I wanted to understand your takeaways from this plan because citing these shelters just seems like such a huge question. I know Councilmember Kettle was definitely asking some questions here.
Yeah, I mean that's always was going to be the piece is where these things go. Which is why I think in some ways the biggest change of the three pieces of legislation that Mayor Wilson transmitted was around the leasing question, basically giving the city more power to execute leases and kind of get spaces ready. Their thought is if we find a space, we want to act quickly on it. Um, you know, I it's interesting, watching that meeting, I was struck that this almost feels inevitable. Like
What
if
what feels inevitable? The siting
the
conflict
well,
or
just this piece that so what and what Mayor Wilson is trying to do is something that other mayors have basically failed at, which is to scale up a lot of shelter really, really quickly.
Mhm,
And that sounds good. And I think she's taking actions that would suggest she's serious about that.
mhm,
Part of the reason, though, that it has been hard to do it this quickly is there are always these kinds of layers of concern around where you're going to put it and what the reaction is going to be
mhm.
around it. And I think we saw some of that from the council that those concerns are not exactly going to go away. And
Yeah.
I think to an extent, and I don't know this for sure, I think to an extent though, if Mayor Wilson is going to actually succeed at getting 4,000 units online in her mayoral administration, I mean, not even the 4,000 number, this 500 number that they're going for by the World Cup, it's just very hard for me to imagine that all of that can go through the level of community engagement
Right.
that these tiny home villages have gone through in the past. It just to get to that number, I think you're going to have to skip some of that.
Right. It's this balance between this desire for speed to treat it like an emergency. We've heard that a lot from the mayor, but also the need to go through some sort of process to make sure it's vetted by neighborhoods, right?
Yeah, and Councilmember Kettle has a good point, which is like it's not just a formality. Like if they do their first village and it's a disaster and the neighbors make a big stink out of it and there's this big political pushback, it is going to be harder to do the ones in the future. At the same time, you can't to get to 4,000, you can't do 6 months of engagement on every 100 units. It's just the math doesn't work
Yeah.
on that. There's going to have to be a expedited timeline here to move on that stuff. So I understand what Councilmember Kettle is saying, and he's right that if they kind of poison the well on this stuff with the first for the first tiny home village, it's going to be more difficult to do the future ones. But there is a reason why other mayors have not built this many units, and it has something to do with their desire to want to engage, and make sure everybody's happy about it. If you're doing something out of what is an emergency, and the mayor is defining this as an emergency,
Yeah.
it kind of by definition means that certain steps in a process are going to be skipped, and it's going to probably mean that not everybody is going to be fully happy with the results.
Yeah.
But the calculation is this is an emergency, and so this is our top priority. And frankly, it is more important than what the neighbors around think.
Yeah.
Maybe the city hall decides that's not true anymore and they backtrack, but to get to 4,000 units, it sort of necessitates some of that thinking, which
Yeah.
is uncomfortable for Seattle. Seattle City Hall is a place that likes everybody to be happy and get along and pat each other on the back. And, to get to 4,000 units, that might just not work.
Yeah, I know the words Seattle and process just go together. It's
Yes.
it's part of what the city is all about. It's in the DNA. I guess just trying to look at how this thing can succeed, David. This is a big campaign promise, of course, for Mayor Wilson. She made this promise again with support from groups like the Downtown Seattle Association very recently, too. Do you have an idea about how this could work? Essentially, what she would need to do to try to shepherd this process home? Any thoughts there?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first step that she's taken is to have every city department identify any kind of land that they might have. I mean, that's what it comes down to is land. Where are you gonna do this? And so she has her city departments looking for extra land. You know, that's she's certainly not the first mayor who has thought to ask city departments where
Yeah.
their vacant land is.
Yep.
That has come up. I have been to press conferences at Seattle City Light Property where they are opening up small tiny home villages.
Yep.
So frankly, I'm not sure what it is that she can do to identify land that has not already been identified. I had conversations in 2015 with elected officials around vacant city land.
Me too. Yeah.
So, but that's one piece that she's doing. And then again, another one is, they're trying to cut out, frankly, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority
Yeah.
and do this on their own. And that, Mayor Harrell was pretty explicit about his doubts around the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. Mayor Wilson has not really expressed those same kind of doubts so explicitly, but
Her
in
actions certainly say
her
something
actions,
here.
yeah, exactly, suggest that she is not going to wait around for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which in a way kind of undermines the point of it.
Mhm.
And maybe it needs undermining.
Mm.
There are several mayors in a row now who perhaps would suggest it does need some undermining,
Yeah.
but that is what is probably going to happen again. Again, if we're talking about an emergency,
Yeah.
the end result is going to be some hurt feelings and some frustrated neighbors, perhaps. But if the agreement is, and again, she said this on the campaign trail. She said,
Yeah.
I'm going to treat this like an emergency and
Yeah.
try and build 4,000 units. So no one should be surprised if
Yeah.
suddenly there are 4,000 units in
Yeah,
Seattle,
right.
places that you didn't see before.
Yeah.
So in some ways, if she has a mandate on anything, it is this.
Mm.
But the reality of the situation, I think, is going to create some tension.
Yeah, has to with some of these agencies like the RHA too. I'm interested to see what happens next there. Thank you for that, David. I did want to talk about another story you wrote recently. This in regard to Seattle Center, a proposal to revitalize it, to renovate it could cost more than $1 billion. So this plan involves a bond measure, something that would require more support from voters than a simple majority. That's one piece of this here. And it looks like the cost is heading up over $1 billion, maybe 1.3 or 1.5. Can you give us big picture what's going on with this?
Yeah, so the original conversation around this was really focused on a straight property tax levy, which is and for about $1 billion, and it was just going to be Seattle Center. Um, a few things have changed since then. For one, Bruce Harrell lost, and
Yeah,
now Katie Wilson is the mayor. So that, of course, kind of hits the reset button a little bit on the conversation. A lot of uncertainty around whether or not this is going to be a priority for her to pass a measure like this. The other piece is this kind of realization that the city has only so much more room it can go with property tax levies. There's this
as
limit on
as
how
we've
far,
discussed on the podcast here. Yeah, keep going.
as we have discussed, the kicker is bonds don't count towards that limit. So you can do a bond and not affect your property tax limit. So that's the other piece. And then I would say the third piece is perhaps some skepticism from the broader arts community
Mm,
around whether or not dumping $1 billion just to Seattle Center was the right thing or the fair thing to do. And I think,
mm,
Rob Johnson, the head of the Seattle Center Foundation, said he was pretty confident that they could pass a Seattle Center only measure. But I think that they were hearing from a lot of other arts organizations saying, hey, you're kind of over-indexing on Seattle Center, and that's going to eat up the political capital for an investment like this and leave us on the sideline.
hmm.
And when I'm talking about arts organizations, I'm talking about Benaroya Hall, I'm talking about
Yeah,
Fifth Avenue, Paramount, Vera Project,
yeah,
the Black and Tan Hall,
sure.
venues all over the city. And so this proposal has now, to kind of assuage those concerns, has now included some of these venues.
Yeah,
As a result, though, it has to get bigger. So now instead of $1 billion, we're talking 1.3. He said 1.3 to 1.5, but when someone in the city gives a range like that, you can kind of guess it's going to be the bigger one.
yeah, right.
Um, so, now we're talking about a $1.5 billion levy that will include other arts organizations that will need 60% of the vote to pass.
Yeah, and that's the big deal with the bond measure. It needs that 60%. But
Yeah.
essentially, we're just talking about older facilities. I'm definitely thinking about that with Seattle Center, but Benaroya Hall needs a new HVAC system. I mean, we're talking about a lot of aging infrastructure that all needs an
Yep.
update all at once. And I guess the idea here, I don't know. I imagine there's a lot of work, of course, that needs to go on at Seattle Center. Is it going to be a situation where these dollars come in and it's peanut buttered out a little too thinly, or I guess it's all going to be in how these dollars, if indeed this measure goes forward, how they're distributed to these different organizations.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it's going to be, I think to do like the full meal deal for Seattle Center, Rob was guessing maybe it would cost probably like $3 billion. So that obviously is not going to happen. So you're already paring it down,
So
and
so
that
but
would be.
could it, sorry, just to interrupt real quick, could it be a situation where maybe you do a little bit less on the bond measure, but then raise some money from philanthropy to make up the difference? Is that kind of the math here?
And there's going to be some of that. They've set a
Yeah.
goal of $100 million from philanthropy, and then maybe
Hmm.
they can get some more sort of specific investment. Maybe some, I don't know what, Fred Hutch or something wants to
Sure.
invest in Pacific Science Center. Some kind of nexus between
Yeah, yeah.
the facility and the operations of whatever private entity.
Hmm.
But they're not going to get to $3 billion. And so the reason I say that is no matter what, right now there's going to be triaging in what they have to do. They're going to start with the basics. They're going to start with HVAC,
Hmm.
electrical, the things that they need to make that campus run. And then
Yeah.
my guess is they will probably have one kind of foundational, big kind of flashy project, which will almost certainly be the Armory building.
Yeah.
And I would guess that they'll probably sink something like $500 million into redoing that building to make it something kind of big and grand and that they can use as a true sort of center of town that people can
Yeah.
gather in.
Hmm.
Um, and then probably a revamp of the monorail. I mean, I think, and
Yeah.
we'll get into
Wow.
this. I think the Sonics possibly coming,
Hmm.
is great news for Rob Johnson and Seattle Center because now they have a pretty good pitch for why it makes sense for them to start dumping lots of money into Seattle Center right now.
Indeed, indeed. And we're going to talk about that very issue right here. Could it be true? A dream many years in the making. Are the Seattle Sonics really coming back 18 years after they left? That story just ahead on What's Next. David, you get Segway of the Week award on that one. Thank you for bringing up this story here. I really do feel like this story about the Sonics has been talked about so much over the last few years. I can't help but feel like I'm crying wolf a little bit here. But here's what we know, folks. The NBA's Board of Governors is meeting next week to vote on a process to open up negotiation for expansion here. Las Vegas and Seattle are the top two cities they're talking about. It's not a vote to award a franchise just yet. But David, I think this is some big news. What do you make of these machinations with the NBA and the Board of Governors? Is this real? What's your interpretation?
I'm with you, which is I'm not plugged in enough to know when news is real and when it's not. And I remember not to criticize my own employer, but I remember in 2013, the Seattle Times on its front page having a big Sonics jersey
Yep.
because the assumption was the Sacramento Kings were going to move here.
Oh
It
yeah.
was a mission accomplished moment for the city of Seattle, and
Hmm.
then it didn't end up happening. So you
Right.
never know
Yep.
what's going to
Yep.
happen. That
Right.
said, of all of the kind of bluster and smoke over the last few years, it does appear that this is the first kind of real legitimate step. Um, that they can actually begin having conversations with people who might want to be the owners of these teams. And the
Hmm.
fact that it is so clearly stated it's going to be Seattle and Las Vegas, which I think we basically knew before. I mean, it seems like we always knew it was probably going to be Seattle. It seemed like there was some question around maybe Nashville or Las Vegas,
Right.
uh, though Las Vegas always seemed to be the favored one. It does feel like that's real. It allows the NBA to start talking to, say, um, the Lywickies or the
Yeah.
owners
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the Kraken, who would be the most likely to want to engage in these negotiations.
Hmm.
Uh, it opens up that path and in a way that at least everything from what I've read feels significant and real.
Yeah, me too. And we've touched on this issue before too, but now we're actually seeing some of the numbers here. Somewhere between $7 and $10 billion just to pay the expansion fee from the NBA to start up a team. Don't you just hate those hidden fees? Like, wait a minute, I had to pay
I know.
$8 billion just to open the door here. Some of the thoughts about that fee there, and I was just looking at this, not only who could pay it, but how the Seahawks being up for sale for maybe a similar price, does that cloud the sports market here? How do you look at this? It just, there's a lot of big dollars here floating around potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I would think. I mean, how many people are out there who are ready to drop $8 billion on a
Yeah.
sports franchise?
Hmm.
I guess a few. I think that number is reflective of the fact that anytime the NBA adds a team, it dilutes the pool for the other owners. That it is seen as financially worse for them to basically take more slices of the pie.
Yeah.
So I think that high number probably is intended to ease that a little bit,
Yeah.
buy some goodwill from the other owners. Again, I don't fully understand the ins and outs of the NBA business, but
Yeah.
um, I would think a group led by and from what I've read, it sounds like that by far the easiest route would be for the owners of the Kraken to do this Seahawks or the Sonics deal because
Right.
they hold the lease on Climate Pledge. There would be vastly fewer negotiations around that building, and it would kind of kill any other talk of building a new arena for the Sonics. I would think that they would have not a lot of issue in attracting a group of high rollers who want to be the kind of collective owners of a basketball franchise.
Yeah.
As I'm talking, I could see maybe, I don't know, maybe Chris Hansen comes out of the woodwork and tries to put
Sure.
together his own group and
Right.
takes one more swing at that Soto arena.
Yeah.
For all I
Maybe.
know, they're
Wow. Who
talking about a
knows?
2028
Right.
start, which is soon,
Yeah.
and um, I don't think you could build a stadium, an arena in time for
No.
that.
No.
So,
I'm
if
with you.
I'm a,
I really think the Kraken owners were very intentional in terms of how Climate
yeah,
Pledge was built and built for hoops and all that. And they've done. There's storm games that happen there. Seattle U plays basketball games there. I mean, it's been used. I mean, it's a kind of a proven commodity for basketball as well.
Yeah, they don't. There's a reason why that was, that was a great deal for Seattle because it was almost entirely publicly financed, and there's a reason why they put up that kind of money to do it, and it's not just for a hockey team. That
Yeah,
the goal was always to have a basketball team too. So
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure that they have had their pitch, ready for quite some time.
yeah.
It seems, again, reading the tea leaves, it seems like they are far and away the favorites here. But again, I'm not a prognosticator when it comes to the NBA.
Yeah, this is such an interesting time, and we'll have some more information next week and perhaps
I,
some more details. What do you got?
I have to, close on again the hilarity of the city having two jock mayors in a row, and now Katie Wilson maybe being the one who gets to win a Super Bowl, host
Yeah,
the World Cup, and see the Sonics return all under her watch.
that's
It's
a
just,
pretty big trifecta.
yeah.
Well, we do need to wrap up, David, and we are recording this just as the United States is starting a game with Venezuela in the World Baseball Classic Finals. I got to say this. If the U.S. wins or loses, this has just been a really fun tournament. Like Italy, who knew? What do you think about the WBC, man? I think it's been really fun to watch.
No, I think it's great. I haven't had a lot of time to watch it just from kids and everything, but
Oh, yeah.
I think it's great, and you can tell, because there is this thing, like Julio Rodriguez
Yeah.
is great, and he's works really hard for the Mariners, and he wants the Mariners to win, and he wants to win the World Series for Seattle, but he's not from Seattle. He's from Dominican Republic.
Yep.
It's a vastly different place. It's a small island, and so you can see the pride when he talks about playing for Dominican Republic, and that's
Mhm.
echoed across the countries that are playing, and I think that's so you see a level of enthusiasm in the baseball that you don't necessarily always see in a 162 game schedule, and I'm
Yeah.
appreciative of that, and I think it's super fun.
I do too. I do too. When you have, I mean, places that are that small in comparison to the size of the U.S. and all the different players that
Yeah.
are here, it's been an amazing tournament and super fun to watch. Thank you, David. Thanks to everybody who is listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Please become a patron by checking out Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. Pledge $5 a month or more. Thank you very much for your support. Great to have you listening to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you are tuning in, and across the world. Taiwan clocking the competition right now with 17 listeners in just the past month. Doshia, thank you. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2026.